let's talk about Saga Volume 1 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. It's a graphic novel, sequential art. It's got, pictures and words in it. But even if that's not what you're used to, stick around. What I'm going to first do is a spoiler-free review, my thoughts on it, and then I'll do a mildly spoilery discussion, which I might timestamp, I might not, but just skip if you're not interested in that side of it, and you are thinking you might want to read it without any knowledge really going in. Saga is, let's just read the blurb. Saga is the sweeping tale of one young family fighting to find their place in the universe. When two soldiers from opposite sides of a never-ending galactic war fall in love, they risk everything to bring a fragile new life into a dangerous old world. Fantasy and science fiction are wed like never before in the first volume of this sexy, subversive, ongoing epic. So there are 9 volumes published like this, and after a pause from a couple of years ago, it has restarted publication. So it's ongoing now with over 50 issues. I got a slipcase edition with the first 9 volumes in it. Our main characters, to be clear, let's just get a decent shot. Marco, he is from a moon called Wreath. He's colloquially known as a horn because of his horns. Magic using people. And then Alana is a wing. She is from Landfall, which is the planet which Wreath orbits, and this is their daughter Hazel, who is the over narrator of the story. The main action in this, all the action is way in the past, and occasionally get Hazel narrating it in the present, implicit present. It's a sci-fi fantasy world. It's in space. There's ships, there's technology, there are things which are recognisably not sci-fantasy but sci-fi, but there's also magic, there's also, obviously she's a fairy, he's a satyr kind of thing. There's a strong fantasy feel, and there's robots, and there's whatever else, there's ghosts, all kinds of things. Now, in terms of the review, let's talk about words, art, characters, and plot. And the overall summary is that it's very good. It's very, very good. I think some people recommend it, would say it's the best series of the last 10 years. And I don't know about that. I haven't read all the series of the last 10 years. And I've read some good stuff in that period. I think, where I agree, I think up front I'll say it is a good introduction to a certain kind of modern sequential art because it's approachable and easy, compared to things which I might also recommend, like The Sandman. In terms of relatively adult-facing sequential arts, fantasy themes, it's quite open to engagement. Words. So Brian K. Vaughan is the writer, Fiona Staples is the artist. Sequential art is a phrase, was it McDaniel came up with to describe words plus pictures, or was it sequential art is Eisner, isn't it? And then McDaniel talks about the words plus pictures kind of definition of that. And it is that there are words and pictures, and they're in an order, a sequence, and that they tell a story. And so there's this weird hybrid between what we think of as the visual arts in terms of television and movies and prose. And so there are particular things that go into making that work, aren't there? I've talked about this a bit before my White Sand review, and talked about the ways in which prose is different to sequential art. Words. Vaughan is the writer. What that means is he writes the dialogue, obviously, and he'll write the plots, and he'll often give outlines of, even down to pages, for the artist to write. On one end, you have people who write very detailed scripts, which artists then execute faithfully, and on the other hand, you have the Marvel method, which is an issue as a couple of pages treatment of the general plot and events and ideas that need to come out, and dialogue. And then, in fact, with Stan Lee, what would happen is that the artist would draw it, and then it would go back, and then dialogue would be then put in after that stage. Here, Vaughan is writing the story, he's coming up with the world, he is obviously giving an outline because of the way, and I haven't researched this, but just in the way that the narration works, you can tell that there is some sort of guide by page. He is a really clean and easy writer. He's a very good communicator. He doesn't feel the need to fill panels endlessly with words. I mean, it's a dialogue heavy book, undoubtedly, but then you have a page, there's a 2-page spread, and it's got one speech bubble and one bit of narration from Hazel up there, and that's not terribly uncommon. And where there is dialogue, it tends to be fairly snappy, sharp, attempting to be pretty clear. Often the actual words are functional rather than beautiful, though it should be said that, and that's not meant to be a criticism, it's just a fact. It should be said Hazel often, when she's narrating in this lovely let's see if I can get decent, hand-drawn lettering there, as if she's writing in her journal later, that's often very poetic. From my very first day, I was pursued by men. All of them tried to hurt me, but only one managed to break my heart. So here's the thing, that this is what Vaughan is trying to do, isn't he? I'll talk about this later in the plot. He's trying to use words to communicate the story and the characters of this thing where you've got a forbidden romance and a child who isn't wanted by warring species or peoples. And what he does that very effectively and efficiently, and that's one of the reasons, as I said, that I think this is approachable, is that you're going to read it and you're going to understand the things that are being said without needing to double back and reread and deep dive to try to understand anything that's gone on. Art, Staples is a painter of the highest caliber, first-rate comics painter. And I think the cover is not a bad example of that. Her compositions are good. I mean, that's really wonderfully composed in terms of how things are echoed across there, how the colours grade, the positioning of the characters and their poses. Marco looking off to one side and Alana looking just above the painter. I think it's a really beautiful shot, and that holds true throughout. She is doing everything. She is doing the the pencils, the inks, and the colours. Colours are a deeply underrated thing, you find, because colorists who only do the colours are often not credited as main artists. Colour really matters, and I think you can tell this is such a colourful book, a really beautiful book. And Staples is great. She is painterly. She composes things well. Her splashes, her spreads are beautiful. Let's see if I can find a reasonable example of a two-page splash. There's a really great one of them finding a battle with like some monsters, which is just like, wow, okay, that's intense. Is it here? No. Just the colours in this. That's one thing. Maybe a separate point to raise is just how beautiful the colours so often are. Is something worth giving Staples her due. I mean, there is a kind of a single page splash there. Of a spider lady, basically, and the layouts. So the layouts matter in sequential art because they're a way of framing each. If you think each panel is a shot in a movie, and layouts are the way that the shots are then joined together, the way the camera moves in single camera, particularly where careful attention is being paid to the exact angle of a camera, the exact shot over the shoulder, and her layouts are simple. And there is nothing, I can't think of a single example where you get kind of some complex interweaving or bleeds or anything like that, really, in this volume. So her layouts at this point are very simple, but again, they're very clear. You're not going to get confused generally. And you read enough comics by good artists that you end up being like, wait, this panel actually, okay, I need to read this dialogue first because I didn't really understand that's where it was. Never a problem here. Both Vaughan and Staples are really clear, even where they are not exciting. And I think that's more than creditable. It's relevant to say, I think here, I'll say first, the character designs are excellent. And again, I think that cover portrait is a great example with Alana, Marco, and technically Hazel. There are weird and wacky designs, and I guess you've got to give that to both Vaughan and her. There's a major character with a TV for his head. The actual horns and wings are great. There's the guy who runs all the mercenaries, all the freelance assassins. He is like a seahorse dude, which is a very strange image of him sitting at on an empty beach at a desk with his phone or whatever. It's a weird and wonderful world, and Staples, because of this kind of quite high fidelity and contrast and cleanliness, kind of clean digital art style, is really well suited for that, I think. It is a reasonably it's fairly common for there to be sex and sexual imagery involved. It's never really super explicit or graphic. There are moments where it is, but just to be clear, it's not insane or anything. But you might find that too much. And the fact it does sell sex on the back, it's exaggerating in a way that I think you can tell they're thinking, oh, what will sound sexy, but it is a clear and present danger if that's going to bother you. Characters, Vaughan is great at capturing character voice. That's something which is, I think, I would put more on him for me than on Staples. The character designs are very distinct, but the fact that I can read stuff and kind of know, with a tiny degree of context, I can know who's talking. There is fairly quickly a real clear difference between there are 4 to 6 main characters, basically. There's Lana and Marco, maybe technically Hazel, because she narrates. There's 2 people who are hunting them for different governments, Prince Robot IV and the Will. And there's arguably a character called Isabel, who is moderately important in several issues. And they all speak in a way that you recognise, they all have a distinctive register, and it's very clear early on that Vaughan wants to develop a cast of core characters with mutually exclusive objectives, but who are each sympathetic at some level. Prince Robot IV and the Will, in that sense, are not antagonists to the audience, even if they are to our core couple. They're trying to kill our heroes, but they're each given sympathetic introductions and motivations. The plot is the least important pillar here. That's not to say there is no plot, or it's bad, or it's absent, but at this point only a few major features are being sketched out about the world, about the things that have to happen. There's a very simple plot that these guys need to get their baby away, basically. You know what I mean? That's what needs to happen. Alara and Mark are looking to escape with their baby, and both home governments are sending killers after them. One is sending a ally, Prince Robot IV, after them, and the other is hired a practiced killer, a freelancer called the Will, who is a human. Prince Robot is a robot. The Will is, as far as we can tell, human. I don't know if we'll find out he's not later. There are some other characters who need tying in, but that's all that's there for the plot. Whereas in some books you'll be like, oh, the plot is really the mystery they're discovering, or the plot is there is this bad guy to defeat. This is not that. It's a saga. It's not that kind of plot. It's just an ongoing, almost dangerous slice of life kind of mashup. It's very, very good. I would recommend it, as I say, particularly as a first graphic novel if you're looking for an adult-facing, non-superhero, particularly graphic novel. I think it's evidently a classic. It doesn't need to be perfect, and it doesn't need to be the best book of the last 10 years to become a real classic, because it does so many things so well to such a degree, so consistently in this arc, in these 6 issues. I guess I'll see how it goes on for me. So that is the end of the kind of non-spoiler, or in terms of I've just outlined the basic plot review. I want to discuss a few points or themes, just from my perspective, things that seem to come out to me about it that seem worth talking about. I will try to keep these fairly light on the spoilers, so that if you aren't that fussed, you can listen to this and you won't feel like it's been ruined. But just as a warning, there we are. First, 4 themes. First is kind of how it deals with war, patriotism, home, things like that. And I imagine this will deepen, but right now it is a fairly simple, simplistic even view of these 2 people who have, there's obviously stuff going on. So Marco obviously has some kind of past in the military. He's sworn himself, he's become a pacifist, but there are hints of a dark past. Alana was a prison guard, that's where they met. And they don't like war. The war seems pointless and ridiculous. Their own peoples don't massively fight it anymore. They might meet each other out elsewhere, but they don't fight at home because that's mutually assured destruction. They fight it via proxy. Are you feeling any echoes here? In that sense, it's simplistic. Oh, that's bad. What's good, though, is that they want to have a baby, or they do have a baby, and they want to look after this baby in a cruel world that doesn't seem like it's a place you should bring a baby. And it reminds me there of McCarthy's The Road. Very different plot, but the idea that a child is a declaration of hope. It is a statement that you believe that things can be better. And I think that's very clear here. It is a bit flower powery. There are things that motivate other characters. So Prince Robot wants to go home, but he has to go and finish one last job, essentially. The Will has a frustrated romance. He has a real sense of justice that he doesn't like being called out for when it's suggested it might clash with the fact that he's a hired killer. You know, every man must have a code. So you've got these immediate, very simple drawings at this point, but immediate idea about violence and justice and peace, and the values that matter to people. And I think in that sense, you know, the idea that it is something about the way that war and an military-industrial complex corrupts and damages people, all those four main characters, also certainly Isabel as well, that who is a ghost of a war child, basically. That's all very clear here and communicated very well. And though it is a bit simplistic and flower powery, I thought, you know, I've read worse things. I can cope with a bit of open in your face preaching. Everything's preaching. This is open and in your face about it, but I can cope with that as long as it's not patronising as well. And I didn't find it patronising. I thought it was diegetic. It was in the world. It was something that really mattered to the people involved, and you understood and sympathised with them for that. Second, family. Obviously, big theme is family. War, bad. Violence corrupts and degrades, but family, good. That Marco and Alana have a family and build a family is hope, whereas you see other people are alienated via their broken families or lack of families. They adopt Isabel functionally as well. That's this sign that this is something, and not necessarily purely out of philanthropy, but it is a sign of the fact that family grows and builds. They get on this seed ship as well, this tree ship, and that is, you know, again, a sign of life. Other ships are warships, they're metal, they blow stuff up. Their ship is living, which reminds me of those guys in Hyperion with the tree ships. You also end up with the book with the grandparents turning up and the fact you're going to have to deal with that, those relationships, and dealing classically with the fact that you've got essentially a mixed race baby. That's the kind of the obvious context or background of that in our world, and then you've got grandparents who have to deal with that, and they're there now. The pressures of family, because with Prince Robot it's that his father won't let him go home. The Will has this failed romance with the Stork. He hasn't got a marriage. As I say, those are things which also negatively define our anti-heroes. Third, and this connects to that again, to the romance or marriage side or whatever else of family, sex. There's a really interesting thing that, as I say, there are moderately, I mean, it's not explicit in the sense of you know it when you see it, Potter Stewart pornography, but it is pretty clear and open, and it's interesting to me that the way it is colour graded matters, that that intimacy brings in colour and saturation, whereas coldness and alienation in sex in a few different situations is weirdly coloured, either washed out or rather putridly coloured. And certainly that matters for the Will, as on the Pleasure Planet he is, you know, he finds out that they are selling children, and that, you know, is essentially then suddenly desexualized, and the Will goes, you know, he loses it. He has his code, and so sex is not then something here if it is being used. You know, what I'm suggesting is there is an artistic purpose to it. We can approve or disapprove of it, or we can feel comfortable or uncomfortable with it. But the way it is used is purposively. It's, you know, including artistic techniques to do with framing and colour, representing intimacy versus alienation, about meaning and morality, are all presented in this as things which are communicated via sex. And there is a point early on that Vaughan makes the point that having a child, procreating, is like artistic collaboration. It's something you, out of the two, become one, and you create a new thing that is not you, but is new. Is not you, but is new. And I think that is something which you can see sex as a metaphor for, a incarnate and concrete metaphor for. Finally, the way that magic is used. This is a world where there is magic. It's a world where there's science, and it's a world where there's magic. And an important point, all we basically know about magic of the type that we've seen really described with Marco's magic is that you need a secret to perform magic. you need to sacrifice a secret to do something, and the idea that magic comes at a cost is common, and even that it comes at the cost of secrets, but the cost of the true name or whatever. But here it feels particularly kind of resonant because here intimacy and family are at stake. That's a major theme, and so the idea that to create something magical you have to sacrifice something of your own, you have to give of yourself to the spell. You have to become vulnerable. The need to trust, in some cases someone else gives you a secret, is very powerful. To collaborate, to produce something new and beautiful perhaps. And I think that's interesting. Again, I'm sure we'll see magic negatively, destructively used, and I think that will necessarily be, at least at one level, the idea of the perversion of trust and breakdown of trust and breakdown of intimacy. But what we see here so far is something quite different, and as in it is used to present the intimacy between Marco and Alana particularly, and I thought that was really interesting and clever. I enjoyed that. I have literally started the second book, but I stopped it so I could just capture my thoughts on this. I don't really have massive predictions for it, like I don't know what is likely to happen. Knowing it is a fairly long slice of life, but with a horrendous galactic war, is kind of, gives away the fact that you're not going to have plot points very quickly conclude and everyone's going to be dead. It isn't ongoing. But I guess the things you can imagine is you got to see that there are going to be a development of those antagonistic characters, in terms of, I think we're going to get background on them sooner rather than later. I think the grandparents turning up, you're going to have to deal with that clash and that issue of integration or alienation from the new family unit that has been created separate from their desires. And I think that we're probably going to see, the world building has probably got to amp up slightly, not because they're suddenly, Vaughan and Staples do a solid job without it being an exciting, crazy world. At a deep level, it's beautiful, it has great stuff in it, but it's not yet become this insanely deep thing. But I think what will become necessary is that to flesh out these characters, which is a strength of the book so far, we're going to have to start pushing into the world, because people come from places. And certainly we know that's hinted at with Prince Robot, and in terms of his background is going to matter. So yeah, that's my predictions, I guess. But yeah, if you have read Saga Volume 1, what do you think? And if you're big into Saga, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk more about what you think about this. Till next time.